Britain's railway system, thought over as a safe way to travel, transformed into a dangerous hunting ground for two of the country's most notorious criminals during the 1980s. John Duffy and David Mulcahy spread terror across London's rail network. Their reign of violence lasted 5 years and reshaped British policing permanently. Their case brought several groundbreaking changes to British criminal investigations. UK authorities used psychological profiling for the first time, implemented the Holmes computer system, and made major breakthroughs in DNA evidence collection. The childhood friends turned brutal criminals formed a partnership that eventually fell apart, which led to one of British criminal history's most complex and time-consuming investigations. This is Monsters. John Francis Duffy was born on November 29, 1958 in Dundalk, north of Dublin, Ireland, just south of the border with Northern Ireland. He was the oldest of 3 children born to Frank and Philomena Duffy. They were considered a good working-class family, and Frank worked as a bricklayer. In his youth, people described John as very polite and that his family was the nicest of people. When Frank was laid off in 1965, the family moved to the de Maurier house flats on Lawn Road, just a few blocks away from the North London rail line. It was there that John would start attending Haverstock School in 1970. It was considered a rough school at the time, and since John was short and scrawny, he was easily targeted by bullies. He was ridiculed over his red hair, so he began wearing a parka with the hood up at all times, no matter the weather. David John Mulcahy was born on May 23, 1959, and it's known that his parents had immigrated to London from Ireland, but I couldn't find any information about David's place of birth. David was also the victim of bullying, but he was bigger and more confident than John. It wasn't long before they realized that they were safer staying together. Safety in numbers, so they say. But John was still not safe from all bullying. David became the dominant of the two and would pick on John in his own way. Their shared experiences of social isolation created a bond that investigators would later call a unique but wicked partnership. The two boys grew so close that they thought of themselves as like brothers. John would later say, quote, "We did everything together. We were in the same classes. We played truant together. If he got up to some mischief, I was always there, and vice versa." Their school years revealed troubling signs of their disturbing partnership. Their behavior showed several concerning patterns. They often skipped school to visit Hampstead Heath. They would go out scaring, courting couples on purpose, and they treated animals with cruelty. A disturbing event happened when they turned 13 years old. Teachers caught David torturing and killing a hedgehog in the school playground as John watched and laughed. David was covered in blood spatter, which led to his temporary suspension. Eventually, the pair began taking judo lessons in an effort to become warriors. They also joined the Army Cadet Force as a means of honing their skills. Then they began targeting girls at school, and while playing tag would catch the girls and touch them inappropriately. John and David left school in 1975 without qualifications but seemed to build fairly normal lives. David got a job as a plumber, then became a painter before qualifying as a plasterer. John first worked at a youth center before training for a certificate in carpentry and joinery. After that, he started working with a building company, but was let go for frequent absences and eventually started working as a carpenter with British Rail at the Euston station. Even into adulthood, John and David were said to be very immature. They showed early signs of violence by shooting at people with an air gun from a pub window. The pub was owned by David's father, and they ended up shooting 5 people, with 4 of them requiring hospital treatment. The pair were arrested, and on December 13, 1976, they were convicted of actual bodily harm. It doesn't look like they served any time, likely getting probation. Their crimes grew more serious as they felt untouchable. A childhood promise bound them together, as they said they would never grass on each other, which is a slang term for ratting someone out. Their ordinary appearances masked their growing criminal behavior. They started with burglaries and car thefts before moving to more serious crimes. David soon developed strong misogynistic ideals, and they attempted to sexually assault 2 women that David had developed a hatred for. They waited for one of the women to return home on 2 different occasions, but she never did, and they gave up. They broke into the other woman's home, but she soon returned and had a man with her, so the duo fled. In the spring of 1977, David met a 16-year-old named Sandra Carr, and the two got married that June. Sandra said that David and John were jokesters who made her laugh. David would end up meeting Margaret Byrne, and since her parents didn't approve of John, they secretly got married in 1980 and didn't move in together until a few months later. Life seemed normal on the surface, yet their weekend activities painted a different picture. They spent nights together despite their marriages during hours that would later become their crime spree window. They were arrested in 1981 for stealing wine and spirits from a storeroom, and they were given suspended sentences. Over the years, their behavior became more erratic. David was called Crazy Dave, as he was always ready to take on dangerous dares. Margaret would later describe her first 4 years of marriage to John as a journey of John going from a nice person to a raving madman. By the time the deadly duo were 22, David and Sandra had a child together. After being unsuccessful at getting pregnant by then, Margaret borrowed enough money from John's parents to consult a specialist who informed the couple that John had a low sperm count. It was sometime that year that John tried to kill himself, but there's not much information about the method or how it was thwarted. Also in 1982, Margaret was sent away for a training course for her job as a nurse. During that time, John and David planned to kidnap a woman, blindfold her, drive her around London, walk her across rooftops, and then hold her hostage at John's house. A woman in the area reported seeing 2 men watching her outside a window, and when she yelled out for help, the men, who matched John and David's description, fled. On June 12, 1982, the men saw a 20-year-old woman walking near the Hampstead Heath railway station. They grabbed her and dragged her into the brush where they sexually assaulted her. Then they returned to John's house where they talked about it being a rush and planned another attack. Their wave of terror unfolded in distinct phases. The duo targeted lone women near railway stations and committed 18 sexual assaults throughout London and its suburbs during their first year. The attack stopped briefly in autumn of 1983 when John separated from Margaret. John's employment with the railway gave him free access to rail travel, which he used to gain expert knowledge of the tracks and the surrounding areas. In September, the pair claimed their second victim at Golders Green. A few days later, they sexually assaulted a 17-year-old near Finchley Road in Frognall. Due to the attacks being so close together, authorities were sure that they were the work of the same 2 men. Some of the victims were able to give some description, but the composites weren't close enough that anyone would recognize them as John and David. The composites appeared in the newspaper on October 22, 1982, and 2 days later, the pair grabbed a woman off the street and dragged her to a secluded area where they both sexually assaulted her. No more attacks were linked to John and David the rest of that year, but on March 26, 1983, they grabbed a 29-year-old manager of a local restaurant as she was walking home from work. While she was trying to fight them off, she bit David's hand, which angered him so much that he threw her to the ground and kicked her repeatedly before the 2 fled. In July, a woman was walking to visit her boyfriend when she was grabbed from behind and dragged into an area near the tracks. She would later say that the assailant told her, quote, "My name is Dave and I've never touched a woman before." She tried to talk to him, and as he relaxed his grip, she made a break for it but was unsuccessful. David became enraged again and sexually assaulted her. She ended up at the hospital where doctors were able to collect forensic evidence, though back then they couldn't get DNA. It was then that John began having marital problems, and it seemed to have slowed down the attacks. It's also possible that they committed crimes that were not reported or never connected to them. At the end of 1983, Margaret had left John, and he was then alone to let his violent thoughts take over. By then, John and David had stolen a copy of Michael Jackson's Thriller and were playing the title track to pump themselves up as they hunted. The men continued their attacks through 1984. A 33-year-old social worker on January 20th. A 23-year-old woman waiting for a train at West Hampstead Station on June 3rd. On July 15th, the duo spotted two 18-year-old au pairs who had missed the last train out of Hampstead Heath. The women were walking up the road when they were each grabbed by one of the men and dragged into the woods where they were sexually assaulted. At the beginning of 1985, John started attacking women on his own. He had a desire to prove that he didn't need David. He had been arrested for sexually assaulting Margaret in a park in Hendon, but he was bailed out. The court ordered him to stay away from his estranged wife. Shortly after, he sexually assaulted another woman in the same park, and when he was finished, he forced her to run a comb through her pubic hair to remove any of his hairs that might still be on her. He learned that from the investigation into Margaret's sexual assault case. The violence reached new heights by July of 1985. John and David struck 3 times in a single night around Hendon and Hampstead on the 13th. Within a few hours, they attacked 3 women, a dancer, a nursery school assistant, and a secretary. The police were already working to find the serial rapists, but after there were 3 attacks in a single night, the Metropolitan Police launched Operation Hart, making it their biggest investigation since the Yorkshire Ripper case. Since the evidence they had previously collected had been tested and showed the attacker had type A blood, the investigators compiled a list of sex offenders who had that blood type. One of the people who was added to that list was John Duffy, as he was in the system after sexually assaulting his estranged wife. The investigators started interviewing everyone on the list, but there was still time before they got to John, as he was the 1594th name. It's believed that John started questioning David's level of violence. It seemed that David was more excited by violence than with sexual assault, and John initially didn't want to move up from sexual assault to murder. Many of their victims would go on to say that John was less violent than David. At one point in January of 1985, a 16-year-old grabbed by the pair said that John had told David not to sexually assault her. David was still going to go through with it until John said that he saw somebody and they ran off. John would later tell authorities that he lied to scare David. In September of 1985, John contacted Margaret and asked her to meet him. When she arrived outside a North London rail station, he became aggressive and started threatening her. Margaret left, but John followed her. She went straight to her boyfriend's house, where John forced his way in and attacked the couple with a retractable baton. Margaret and her boyfriend received treatment for head wounds, and John was arrested for malicious wounding. On September 19th, he was once again released on bail despite the objections from the police who were involved. The very next day, he sexually assaulted a 20-year-old woman, and she was able to give a decent description of John. It was featured on the news, and eventually John was a suspect, but the victim couldn't positively identify him in person. It's believed that that close call caused John to believe he should stop leaving victims alive. By then, John Duffy had been charged with sexually assaulting his estranged wife, was given an injunction to stay away from her, but still attacked her. He should have been kept behind bars. Unfortunately, he wasn't, and it would lead to the most deadly period of his and David's span of crimes. John seemed to have gotten over his concern for David's escalating violence, since he seemed to have increased his own level of violence. Their crimes evolved to murder at the end of 1985. Allison Day was born on May 23, 1966, and was put up for adoption. She was adopted by Kenneth and Barbara Day when she was a few months old. In 1985, she lived in Upminster with her parents and brother and was engaged to a man named Paul Titteman. She had been dating Paul for about 3 years, and he worked as a printer for a graphics company in Hackney Wick. On the evening of December 29th, there was a problem with the printing equipment, and Paul's employer asked him to work late to catch up from the delay. Paul had called Allison and asked her to come keep him company. She left her house at about 6:15 p.m. and stopped to chat with some friends at a bus stop. A ticket collector remembered a woman matching Allison's description asking for directions at about 7 p.m., but that was the last time she would be seen. Paul told her that he would go out and look for her at around 7 since his employer was only a few blocks from the train station, but he couldn't find her. At 9:15 p.m., Kenneth Day called the police to report his daughter missing. The following day, the news was playing appeals for any information about the young woman's disappearance, but weeks passed without any leads of where she had gone. John and David set out on December 29th, and Hackney Wick was on their list of spots to go hunting. It was poorly lit and usually pretty deserted. They were watching from the other side of the platform when Allison departed the train. David grabbed her from behind, pulled a knife, and told her that they wouldn't hurt her if she was quiet. They took her down under the rail bridge that went over a canal and sexually assaulted her. When they were finished, they climbed the bank of the canal where, in past attacks, they would have left her with instructions to wait 15 minutes. Instead, they walked her across the rail bridge where Allison fell into the canal, and when John pulled her out of the water, she broke free and ran. John caught up with her and, like with other victims, Allison's defiance enraged David, so he pushed her over a pile of rubble and sexually assaulted her again. Then he took Allison into a field, used the knife to cut up some of her clothes, and used the strips to tie her up. Then he tied a piece of cloth around her neck and put a small stick in the knot and started twisting. When the woman was dead, they dragged her body back to the canal, put a rock in each of her coat pockets, and rolled it in. John and David each took a different path back to their vehicle and then drove home. David told John that he could claim that he had been home with his kids all evening. His wife was out of town and he had dropped the kids off at his mother-in-law's house but assumed they wouldn't remember. When John got home, he changed his clothes and joined his parents at a social club, likely hoping to use that as his alibi. Police divers found Allison's body in the canal on January 15, 1986. She was about 600 feet or 180 meters south of the bridge. The Royal Navy had found her coat with rocks still in the pockets during a training exercise further down the canal. Like any murder investigation, Paul was immediately a suspect. He was interviewed and the detective in charge didn't believe he was involved. Other evidence pointed in other directions. The strangulation with the use of a tourniquet led some investigators to believe that their killer had martial arts training. Outside of that, though, there wasn't much evidence. The body had been in the water for more than 2 weeks, which washed away anything of value. Maartje Tamboer was born on March 22, 1971 in the Netherlands. Her father was a civil engineer who worked for Shell UK, so her family, including her 2 younger siblings, had lived in a number of countries before moving to West Horsley, just southwest of London. On April 17, 1986, Maartje was getting ready for a school trip to the Netherlands and told some friends that she wanted to bring some English candy with her. After school, she went home and had a snack before she rode her bike to a candy shop in East Horsley. She took a path that ran alongside the rail tracks between East and West Horsley. The family rode their bikes on the path frequently, but the kids were told never to use it if they were alone. They were instructed to use the main roads, but it was a pretty good shortcut, and being an impatient 15-year-old, Maartje took the path alone anyway. When Maartje's mother returned home at about 6:30 p.m., she was alarmed that her daughter wasn't there. She called the police soon after, and a search for Maartje began. At 10:30 p.m., the girl's bicycle was found on the edge of some woods. The following morning, Maartje's body was found in the woods near where the bike had been left. In the afternoon of April 17th, John and David rode around on a motorcycle looking for a good place to go hunting. They stopped at a railway station and took a train south to East Horsley. As they walked west, they noticed a path next to the tracks and saw Maartje riding her bike towards them, but the area wasn't clear, so they let the girl pass. They had passed a bunch of shops and assumed that Maartje was going to them and would soon return, so they found a more secluded part of the path and tied a piece of fishing line from a post to a fence across the path as a trap for their prey. They each took a position on each side of the path and waited. After about 10 minutes, Maartje returned, and when she saw the line, she stopped. John grabbed her and led her into the woods, and David took her bike and pulled it off the path. They tied her up with a very unique type of string. John sexually assaulted the girl, and when he was finished, he realized that David was gone. When he found him, David explained that he had gone to hide the bike and he was seen by a woman walking her dog. Maartje started to talk, but David struck her in the head with a rock and she was knocked out. Then David pulled off her belt and wrapped it around her neck, putting a stick through it that could be twisted like a tourniquet. He told John, quote, "That will make it easy for you. We're in this together. I did the last one, you do this one." When Maartje was dead, the two split up like before. John left the area while David went back to Maartje's body and wiped away fingerprints. Then he placed tissue near her genitals and lit it on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. The authorities would find the line that was used across the path, which had been taken down by a passerby while the crime was being committed. It turned out that the string was not very common. It was a type of string made from twisted paper that had been manufactured by a small factory. Since Maartje had also been strangled with a tourniquet, investigators believed they were looking for the same person or persons who had killed Allison Day. The railway murders case changed British policing and brought new investigation techniques that would change criminal investigations forever. The case's complexity cost over £2 million and lasted 15 years. That meant police needed new ways to solve crimes. The first of the new technologies was used after Maartje Tamboer was murdered. Before the autopsy, a laser was used to scan the body to try to detect any fingerprints on her skin. The forensic technicians recovered semen from Maartje's clothing, and it was found to belong to someone with type A blood. But by then they were able to break the sample down further by testing enzymes. That new technology allowed investigators to eliminate 4 out of 5 suspects based on those tests. Police forces created the Home Office Large Major Inquiry System, or HOMS, to handle complex investigations better. It had been developed due to the massive investigation of the Yorkshire Ripper and changed how police managed major cases. They put all of their information into the computer, which allowed them to easily retrieve data, manage documentation, and cross-reference information. When investigators looked into the string, they found it was manufactured by a company called Somic, and it was specifically Somcord B24K, which was made from 50-gram imported paper. It was not a commercial product and was only sold to industrial businesses, commonly to laundries who used it to tie up clothes. It would turn out that John had the string due to Margaret having worked at the Sunlit Laundries at some point while they were together. Anne Siniuk was born on June 11, 1956 in North London. She had grown up living with her grandmother and parents, but by 1984 both of her parents had passed away. She had been dating a man named Lawrence Locke, and the two got married on April 19, 1986, just 2 days after Maartje Tamboer was murdered. The Lockes went on honeymoon to the Seychelles for 3 weeks, and when they returned, Lawrence returned to work as a meat importer, and Anne went back to her job as a secretary at London Weekend Television. The two had no idea that they would only have 1 month as a married couple. A few days before May 18th, Anne had sold her car, so where she would normally drive to work, she was taking the train until the new car that Lawrence had ordered for her came in. It was a gift for her 30th birthday, which was about 3 weeks away. She wasn't scheduled to work that day, but her employer called and asked if she could come in and help out, to which she agreed. She rode her bicycle to Brookman's Park Station and took the train to work at about 4 p.m. She typed up scripts until about 8:30 p.m. and left the building to take the train back home. Anne had worked later than she had expected, so her grandmother was actually expecting her home earlier than she would have arrived even if she did make it back safely. When Lawrence arrived home, she expressed her concern, so he went to the train station to look for his wife. When he got there, he didn't see her anywhere, but he also didn't see her bike. He drove down to the next station, but she wasn't there either, so he called the police. A search was conducted, and her bike was found the following morning about 225 feet or 70 meters from where she had parked it. It didn't seem as though the investigators believed that Lawrence was involved, but the media suggested that since he had been out of town the day before her disappearance. That morning, John had attended a martial arts class, and then he and David went out hunting. They went to Brookmans Park Station as David had seen a woman with a white bag get off the train on several previous Sundays, so they decided to make her their next target. They got there at around 6 p.m. and scoped out the station's surroundings. By the time they got back to the station, the ticket office was closed and the lights were off. They saw that there was a single bicycle in the bike shed, and it was a woman's bike, which made David think it might belong to the woman with the white bag. They decided to hide the bike in order to catch their victim off guard. At 10:01 p.m., a woman got off the train, and it wasn't the woman with the white bag. It was Ann Locke. She walked over to the bike shed and was confused when she didn't see her bike. Suddenly, David grabbed her and John told her he had a knife and they just wanted her money. They walked her to a field quite a ways from the station and John sexually assaulted her. David told John to go back to the station and get the car. He took Ann's handbag and walked back to the car. When he got to the road near the field, he had to wait another 15 minutes before David approached the car. He told John to move over so he could drive. It's never been known what exactly happened to Ann, as John was the only one of the killers who had talked to the authorities, but David told him that she wouldn't be talking to anyone, and John understood. Investigators had trouble pinpointing exactly where Ann might have been, as a couple told them they had gotten off the train at Brookmans Park at 10:01 p.m. and nobody else got off the train then. Lawrence also told the police that he had left to go to the train station just before 10, and when he got there, a train was pulling in. It's possible that John had the time of her arrival wrong and she actually came into the station earlier, but either way, it made search teams cover a broader area. They searched forests and fields and drainage tunnels, but couldn't find Ann. A few days into the search, they found an address book in some bushes that had belonged to the missing woman. Her diary was found about 2,100 feet or 650 kilometers away. It was confirmation that Ann had made it to Brookmans Park, but they still couldn't find her body. After 7 weeks of persistently looking for any sign of the woman, the police called off the search. 2 weeks later, on July 21st, railway workers found her decomposed body in a field about a half a mile or 1 kilometer from the rail station. Her body had been bound, this time with tape, and David had used tissue and fire to try to destroy evidence. She had been suffocated with a sock, but it didn't seem that a tourniquet had been used. The team had gotten multiple sketches and a criminal profile that described John pretty well, and when they looked over their list of suspects, they realized that he should be higher up on the list than he was. In October of 1986, John grabbed a young girl and tied her up with her own pantyhose. He also put a blindfold over her eyes, but it came loose when he was sexually assaulting her. She was able to give the police a detailed description, and again, it matched John Duffy. Investigators started following him, and they arrested him on November 26 after they found him following another woman in the park. When they searched his apartment, they found the Somcord B24K, which was the same string used to tie up Allison Day and Maartje Tamboer. Several sexual assault victims were able to identify him, but they told the investigators that John hadn't worked alone. That's when they began looking into David Mulcahy, but they had a hard time finding evidence to prove he was involved. John's interrogation presented unique challenges. He managed to keep silent about his accomplice despite overwhelming evidence. Police knew someone else was involved, but they needed more information in order to arrest David. No matter what they did, after his initial arrest, John refused to talk. He was tried at London's Old Bailey, where he pleaded not guilty to 2 counts of murder and 5 counts of sexual assault. At trial, he claimed to have no memory of any of his crimes. His ex-wife, Margaret, was a star witness and testified about his violence against her. He was found guilty on all charges. He was convicted of the murders of Allison Day and Maartje Tamboer. There wasn't enough evidence to charge him with the murder of Ann Locke. He was sentenced to a full life term with a letter from the Home Secretary saying he was never to be released. It seemed as though John had kept his word and did not rat out David, but his solidarity wouldn't last forever. While John was serving his sentence, David was moving on with his life. He was still married and had 5 children by then. He continued martial arts training and took up roller skating. He completely stopped attacking women and put on a mask that made him seem like a respectable member of society. Detective Les Bolland created a breakthrough when he started visiting John in March of 1995. Bolland earned John's confidence through careful psychological manipulation and trust building. Prison Psychological Services became involved in 1997, which marked a turning point. John agreed to make detailed admissions in June of 1998. Police secretly transported him to a remote Hertfordshire police station for the confession sessions. He set his own terms and asked that interviews work around World Cup football matches. John revealed they would play Michael Jackson's Thriller in the car before the attacks to psych themselves up. Police later found the tape in David's house, which supported his account. John admitted to 17 new charges that he carried out with David. His testimony was vital in bringing his former friend to justice. Police tracked David for several months after John's claims before arresting him in February of 1999. DNA tests, which weren't available during the original investigation, proved David's involvement conclusively. When they went back and re-examined some of the tape David had used to bind his victims, they found one of his fingerprints. Then one of the sexual assault victims identified him in a lineup. Despite an extensive investigation for any evidence that David had committed more crimes since John had been locked up, they fortunately didn't find any. It's been asked how David was able to just turn off his compulsion for sexual violence, and it's not known. It's possible that he became so scared of getting caught that he was able to stop. It's also possible that he was so disconnected from being a human being that he just lost interest like a child loses interest in a hobby. He also found another outlet for violence with his family. He had beaten his 9-year-old son with a stick in 1990, and the boy was taken from the home. It's said that David tried to look like a good family man on the surface, but nobody knows what went on behind closed doors. John Duffy was charged with the 17 new crimes that he had confessed to. On March 24, 1999, he pleaded guilty to 9 counts of sexual assault, 6 counts of conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and 2 counts of burglary with intent to commit sexual assault. One of his charges was for the sexual assault of Anne Locke, but he couldn't be charged with her murder due to double jeopardy laws. David Mulcahy's trial started on September 11, 2000. David had already claimed that he was completely innocent, that John had lied about his involvement, and that the police had made up the DNA test that proved he was guilty. John Duffy's testimony was backed up by evidence, lending him credibility. It also helped that John gained absolutely nothing from pointing a finger at David. He actually ended up pleading guilty to more crimes on top of the ones that had given him a life sentence. At one point during cross-examination, John said, quote, "There is a lot of self-hate for what I have done. I feel a lot of guilt. I raped and killed innocent young ladies. I accept that. I am not trying to shift the blame. I did what I did. It became too much for me, the realization what a disgusting person I was. There's no excuse. No promises have been held out. I've no hope that by giving evidence, one day I'll be a free man. I expect to die in prison." The prosecution strategy also carefully portrayed David as the dominant force in the partnership. Evidence pointed to him as the first person who decided sexual assault alone no longer gave enough thrill. The defense's only strategy was to claim that John was a liar and to try to put suspicion back on Lawrence Locke for his wife's death. The defense called him to the stand, and he claimed to have little memory of the night 14 years ago when Anne disappeared. He said, quote, "I have memories of the funeral. My father died as a result of those events, and my mother grieved for him, and I had to care for her for 10 years. There is a gap in my memory from before we were married. I don't have any clear memory of the night she disappeared, but I have memories of her smile. I remember that vividly." Then David took the stand and lied about every detail of the case. He claimed that he and John had drifted apart after he got married, despite multiple people testifying that they had been best friends up until John's incarceration. He explained that John probably had a different accomplice who just happened to match his description. He also claimed that the police must have stolen his DNA and placed it on clothing recovered from the two 18-year-old au pairs that had been sexually assaulted in 1984. On his cross-examination, the jury saw his anger come to the surface. The defense pointed out that his alibi for the date Allison Day was murdered was that he was home with bronchial pneumonia, but his mother confirmed that he had gotten a call that day and went out shortly after. She had watched the kids while he was gone. They also had the testimony of his doctor, who said he had been sick earlier in the month, but when he came back in for a follow-up visit 6 days before Allison's murder, he had fully recovered. On February 2, 2001, David Mulcahy was found guilty on all counts, 15 in total. Multiple sexual assaults, conspiracy to commit sexual assault, and 3 counts of murder. The judge sentenced him to 24 years for each of the 7 sexual assault convictions, 18 years for each of the 5 conspiracy to commit sexual assault convictions, and a life sentence for each of the murders. David has not been quiet in prison. He has continually tried to get media attention for the so-called conspiracy against him. He had someone build a website to try and garner support while using it as a platform to defame the victims in his case. He had a lawyer try to get the public to support an investigation into his case, but it turned out that he wasn't actually a lawyer. Giovanni DiStefano pleaded guilty to 27 charges ranging from deception to money laundering in 2013 and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Most people believe that David's insistence that he's innocent is just a mask he wears for the sake of his family. His wife Sandra still believes that her husband is innocent. The railway murders sparked major changes in police methodology. Operation Hart, the Metropolitan Police's original investigation, exposed critical gaps in existing procedures. The case led to new standardized investigation protocols that included systematic documentation of crime scene evidence, coordinated multi-jurisdictional investigations, standardized time tracking across investigations, better communication between police forces, and detailed witness interview protocols. The Railways Regulation Act changed how safety measures worked on British rail networks. That law requires communication systems in railway carriages after the railway murders case exposed security weaknesses. The case's influence went beyond traditional policing methods. It showed why psychological profiling matters in criminal investigations, which led British police forces to create dedicated behavioral analysis units. The successful convictions, despite the huge time gap between crimes and arrests, proved the value of preserving evidence and keeping detailed records. Today's police forces use many techniques that started during this investigation. The case set worldwide standards for handling cold cases and preserving forensic evidence. Its approach to complex multi-jurisdictional cases became a blueprint for future operations. John Duffy and David Mulcahy's partnership started in a school playground and ended in a courtroom, showing how childhood bonds could turn sinister. Their case teaches new generations of detectives about criminal partnerships' complex nature and the value of persistent investigation techniques. The crimes that these two men committed destroyed countless lives, but in the end, at least they helped the authorities learn better methods for getting monsters like them off the streets. If you're a fan of true crime, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss an episode. You can also hit like or leave us a comment. You can check out our other show, Somewhere Sinister, on YouTube or anywhere that you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to support the show, check out our merchandise at thisismonsters.com. The link is in the description. Thanks again, and be safe.